Airbnb is making life hell for young renters in tourist hotspots. I'm from a small ski resort in Norway. How this has been solved here is that it's always been boplikt, aka duty to live, in the residential zones. And then there are separate zones for cabins and rental apartments. So the normal houses, someone has to live in, or you will get fined. You can't just buy a normal house and use it as a cabin or for short-time rental. This creates two markets with different prices. A similar-sized cabin property is probably 3-4x as expensive as the same house on a boplikt property. But this has kept locals from being prized out. I write solved, as it's not easy to just move to the small city and find somewhere to live, but that's not really because of Airbnb-like situations. It's more that no one dares to build housing hoping someone will move here, and possibly have it unsold for ages.
This sounds like a good solution to the problem described in the article. Are there any issues with it?
When I was living in Dublin, Ireland, I was paying €1,500 a month for a one-bedroom apartment. Nothing special but expensive. The landlord said he was not going to renew the contract because he was going to change it to an Airbnb. I met him a few months later, and he was telling me he was making over $4,000 a month. I can't blame the landlords in this case. It's obviously the better option for them. Even as the article suggests, the landlords can afford to have the locations close during the off-season because there is so much money to be made. Some regulation around the pricing would be nice, but I have no idea how you would even navigate doing that.
Some regulation around the pricing would be nice. Economists of every school and political affiliation will tell you that rent controls are a terrible idea.
Seems to work in Germany. They have rent control nationwide.
Need to ban Airbnb, not implement rent control. Rent control has the effect of locking people in and reducing mobility, favoring those already in the market at the expense of those looking to get into the market. The obvious solution is to build more.
How does rent control lock people in? Only if moving is not possible without raising rent. Effective rent control is about preventing excessive rent, not about preventing the raise of rent to existing tenants. As far as I can tell, the effect of rent control in Germany is mostly that similar properties cost a similar rent, which does not prevent people from moving, because they are not risking an increase just because of the move.
It prevents people outside of the rent control area from moving into it because they'll have to pay prices way higher. Just look at Berlin. Try moving there now and see what options are available to you.
How would additional supply fix that? There is no space in the city to build more. Additional supply would happen at the edges, where most people do not want to move until the area is sufficiently developed. And there are local jobs too. A more desirable area will always be more expensive. Rent control allows to keep that in check. No control will mean that even if there is enough supply elsewhere, those more desirable areas will remain expensive. Rent control is needed to prevent gentrification too.
We stayed in Aviemore, Scotland last year, and the local businesses were really struggling for staff. We were told that there was very little accommodation for seasonal staff, because it was more lucrative to rent it out to tourists. So you can go stay in Aviemore, but good luck finding anywhere to eat your dinner.
St. Andrews, where I went to university, suffers from the same issue. When rich tourists can spend hundreds of pounds a night to stay in Airbnbs at the home of golf, the broke students get forced into paying 2,000 PCM for a dilapidated council house.
House and food should be treated completely differently than other non-essential goods like entertainment and electronics. Destroy housing greater than destroy people's future and family creation. Airbnb is cancer for people trying to start families, as it destroys all local affordable housing.
Living in a city heavily impacted by it, I couldn't agree more. People love it, because they feel entitled as tourists to live like locals, at the expense of the actual locals. It's literally all about entitlement, while forcing the negative externalities on the community you came to visit. Out of sight, out of mind.
And on top of that, there's nothing in renting an Airbnb that provides a local experience. It's an ego-based illusion of experiencing the local life at best.
And I guess you yourself are the exception in that you are entitled to living in a tourist-free city, and all the tourist-dependent businesses in your area, and all the tourists that want to visit, can go to hell? Maybe we should just build enough housing for everyone.
I think the resentment comes from the fact that, for many large cities, the tourism aspect is a very small part of the city. Take, for example, the city I grew up in, Edinburgh. Tourism contributes £1.3 billion to the city's economy, but the city has a GDP of £26 billion. So tourism is 5% of GDP, yet it has a completely disproportionate impact on the city centre. If you count the lockboxes in the centre, you realise almost every flat in the centre is an Airbnb. Those flats take in 4x what a normal rented flat will make. So of course there's a strong incentive for landlords to rent on Airbnb. Right now the city is going through a huge housing shortage. People are having to defer degree courses or live outside the city because they literally can't find anywhere to rent. Of course, tourists aren't the only cause of this. There's a huge intergenerational issue. I know countless people in their 60s living in very large houses, and the city has historically been very conservative about building new houses to match population growth. Ultimately, the city is owned and run mostly by the people who live there. Most of them have no choice about the level of tourism, and it's pretty reasonable to want to have a discussion about whether you really want to have your city turned into a theme park.
The city has historically been very conservative about building new houses to match population growth. This is the main problem. Solution is simple. Allow more new construction, lots of it. Local people have voted against their own long-term interests, if they have voted for politicians who have opposed new construction. It is easy to succumb to short-term selfishness. I already have a home, so I don't want any new construction near me. I oppose building new homes. But in time, every one of us will need to move to a new home. Then you will start to wish that if you had supported building new homes, it would be easier for you to find a new home.
When the younger generation takes over, I predict a massive wave of construction globally. Most millennials have had it up to here, both with high rent and the anti-development I've already got my own house crowd that caused it. And I'll be the old guy yelling about it in the street. I've lived in the same town for most of my life, so I've seen it metastasize across the countryside, gobbling up farmland, wildlife habitat and open spaces, replacing them with McMansions, apartment buildings and Costcos, just to make room for more frickin' people. It's like watching your best high school friend turn into a junkie whore before your eyes. I don't know what the answer is, but there is something to be said for retaining some beauty at the expense of fewer people, and maybe rethinking the idea that growth is necessary to success because we're running out of room, and that definition can't last forever.
It has nothing to do with tourists visiting. It's tourists taking up the local housing. Tourists are planned into any good urban planning, but they're not expected to stay in the residential areas, especially while the local residents are getting hurt because of it. The issue isn't tourists, it's where they're staying. Tourists are welcome, they're not entitled to live like locals at the locals' expense. Stay in a hotel. Maybe we should just build enough housing for everyone. Except that won't ever be enough because more and more will just come. And there's already even a glut on Airbnb for tourists, so none of that housing will go the locals. Building isn't the only solution.
That's fair. From a tourist's point of view, hotels suck, and houses are much better. Homeowners also have the right to rent out their houses, as limited by the zoning. I maintain that the issue can be fixed with more development. Build a new tourist zone with hotels that appeal, or Airbnb-friendly zoning, or something like that. And for locals, more housing equals more options. The local housing can be built outside tourist zones if it has to. The fact is, we have a growing population, a growing global economy, tons of people exiting poverty and entering the global middle class and traveling. This will all accelerate for hundreds of years to come.
Hotels suck only to those buying into the relatively recent religion, live like locals, and they are not that many percentage-wise. Most of the Airbnb customers go there hoping for lower prices, and that's all there is. Tax the hosts like the hotels are taxed. Make them offer the same services the hotels are offering, and I'm sure the main problem will be solved. I say only the main problem, because Venice will be Venice, and the increase in tourist numbers will be felt either way, so at some point the bigger issue will need to be discussed. Should we limit the number of tourists? Sell them time-scheduled tickets or something? Venice has this discussion already.
For a start, I'd like to immediately outlaw short-term rentals, outside of traditional regulated hotels, etc. Then we need to end institutional and foreign investors' ownership of single-family and few-unit homes. I don't mean this as a, wouldn't it be great if someday, but we're never going to do it. But I think the housing crisis some places warrants state legislative efforts this year requiring immediate halt to new purchases and liquidation within 12 months. We might first have two outlaw campaign contributions.
Hong Kong is a tourist hotspot, but it hasn't had an effect on our rental market. It's already hell here.
It's definitely impacted Dublin, where I live, and the rest of Ireland. There's 10x more rooms on Airbnb than there are long-term rents in Dublin. In other parts of the country it's 100x.
Is that 10x more rooms on Airbnb than there are open rental ads in Dublin? Surely there aren't literally 10x more rooms on Airbnb than there are renters in Dublin. I am also very frustrated at rental markets in many places, though I'm still unsure how much of this is merely displacing hotels' hostels relative to actually sucking up long-term rental slots. I am very prepared to lay a lot of blame on Airbnb for high prices, just haven't seen anything conclusive. US-centric stuff I've seen, the fact that building has crawled to a halt, feels way more relevant.
There's 10x more rooms on Airbnb than there are long-term rents in Dublin. Citation needed. I just visited Venice. The old city does not really have any economy outside tourism. There is a naval academy at one of the outer islands, but that is it. The rest of the old city is just one big tourist trap, end of story. All everyday activity moved to the mainland, Mestra. What an end to an ancient merchant republic. Selling themselves. Maybe this is an unescapable consequence of globalization and specialization. We have grown accustomed to the facts that the best microchips are made in Taiwan, and the most influential software corporations reside in Silicon Valley. Perhaps some cities are destined to be tourist traps and nothing else. Many people want to visit Prague, Florence or Mecca. No one wants to go to Gary, Indiana. Remember, the global tourist class is destined to grow. As numerous Asian nations are slowly or faster climbing towards the developed status, India, Bangladesh, Indonesia, etc., the hashtag of people who want to travel and have the means to do so will rise enormously. 15 million people visit Rome yearly. Now, it might be 50 million in 2050. Edit. This comment attracted at least 2 downvotes. I am not too salty about it, but I would like to know why you think I am misinformed, wrong. Don't just downvote. Argue, please. I don't particularly like human mobs in tiny medieval streets either, but I believe the global trend does not depend on what I like or not.
From an economic point of view, the situation is very inefficient. Holiday homes lie empty, while locals struggle to find vacant places to live. Anyone care to propose an economist's solution to the problem?
Popular opinion. I want to live in a tourist hotspot. Nice weather, beautiful scenery, exciting sights, etc. Unpopular opinion. A lot of other people want to experience that too. Perhaps the best thing is to rent-share those prime locations, so a lot of people can enjoy them. Fighting against people visiting is rent-seeking of a different kind.
Tourist hotspots often need a lot of service workers, who have to live somewhere too. Not to mention that higher rents decreasing total stock in one part of a city can create more competition for other parts, raising prices everywhere to some extent.
And I truly expect the market to find an equilibrium such that those service workers will exist, whether through transportation, higher wages, people who highly value the location, etc. Certainly without those service workers, it won't be much of a tourist attraction.